God knows that you're not perfect. And that's something we often forget. You see, so many of us are weighed down by the burden of trying to be flawless, thinking that only when we reach some level of perfection will we be accepted, loved, or used by God. But I want to tell you today that God never asked you to be perfect. He asked you to be willing. God accepts you as you are. He sees every part of you, your strengths, your weaknesses, your past mistakes, and your future hopes. Nothing is hidden from him, and yet he still calls you his own. His love isn't based on your achievements or your failures. It's not something you have to earn or strive for. God's love is steady, consistent, and unwavering, regardless of what you have or haven't done. You don't have to reach a certain level of goodness or perfection to be worthy of his love. God doesn't measure you by the standards of the world, and he doesn't love you conditionally. He knows your struggles, your insecurities, and the areas where you fall short. And he loves you completely, just as you are in this very moment. His acceptance doesn't depend on you meeting a set of expectations or performing to a certain standard. God's love is meant to free you, not burden you. It's a love that welcomes you even with all your imperfections and uncertainties. He doesn't wait for you to become perfect to draw you close. Instead, he meets you in your flaws, in your brokenness, and in the parts of yourself you might not think are worthy of love. This acceptance is not passive, it's transforming. Because God accepts you fully, he also desires to lead you to your best self. He loves you as you are, and he also sees the potential within you. His acceptance is the foundation, and it gives you the freedom to grow, heal, and move forward, knowing you are already loved beyond measure. Purpose over perfection means that what truly matters is living with intention and meaning, rather than striving to be flawless. God is more interested in your willingness to embrace your purpose than he is in you achieving some ideal of perfection. Perfection can become a distraction, a weight that holds you back, causing you to doubt your value and keep you from stepping into the role you are meant to fulfill. Purpose, on the other hand, fuels action, propelling you forward despite imperfections or shortcomings. Living with purpose acknowledges that growth is a journey and that setbacks, mistakes, and detours are part of learning and discovery. It reminds you that your value isn't in getting everything right, but in pursuing a calling that brings meaning to your life and to the lives of those around you. Purpose moves you to act, to take risks, and to make a difference, while perfection keeps you waiting for the right time, the right skill set, or the right circumstances which may never come. Purpose invites you to start where you are with what you have and trust that as you go, you'll be shaped, refined, and equipped along the way. It frees you from the fear of failure, allowing you to see challenges as stepping stones toward a greater goal. When you focus on purpose, your energy goes toward growth, love, and service instead of fear, self-doubt, and comparison. Living for purpose means you are willing to be vulnerable, open, and courageous in your actions, knowing that each step is meaningful. It means you trust that your life has value and direction, even if you don't have everything perfectly together. Purpose is your true guide and your anchor, drawing out the best in you as you live with authenticity and intention. Dependence on God means acknowledging that we cannot do everything on our own and recognizing our need for his strength, wisdom, and guidance in every area of our lives. It's an awareness that while we may have abilities, knowledge, and resources, they are limited and cannot compare to the boundless power and understanding of God. This dependence isn't a sign of weakness. It's a choice to trust a source greater than ourselves, a source that sees what we cannot, knows what we don't, and provides exactly what we need. Relying on God means inviting him into our decisions, challenges, and dreams, understanding that he sees the bigger picture. When we depend on him, we're saying, I trust that you know the best path for me. It's releasing the pressure to have everything under control and finding peace in knowing that we don't have to carry life's burdens alone. This kind of dependence brings comfort because it reminds us that we are never abandoned. Even in our hardest times, God is present, guiding us and giving us strength. In depending on God, we learn to let go of self-reliance, pride, and fear of failure. We shift from a mindset of striving and stressing to one of trust and surrender, allowing God to take the lead. This doesn't mean we're passive instead. It means we act with faith, knowing that God is our ultimate support. When we reach the limits of our own strength, his power meets us there, often in ways that surpass our expectations. Dependence on God also means we turn to Him for wisdom when we face uncertainty. Instead of feeling pressured to have all the answers, we learn to seek His guidance in prayer, listen for His direction, and wait patiently for His timing. It means believing that He is actively working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. Living with dependence on God is freeing. It means we can walk forward confidently, knowing we don't have to be perfect or carry every burden ourselves. We are partners with God, working with Him and trusting Him to be our provider, our guide, and our strength in every season of life. Perfection is not a prerequisite for being loved, accepted, or called to a purpose. God does not demand that we reach some flawless state before He embraces us or uses us to make a difference. Too often, we hold ourselves back from taking steps forward because we feel we must first be perfect, thinking that only when we've fixed every flaw and mistake will we finally be worthy. But God's way is different. He doesn't wait for perfection. He calls us as we are, knowing that the journey itself is part of our growth and transformation. When we release the burden of needing to be perfect, we make room for God to work through us as we are right now. God values willingness and a humble heart more than unattainable flawlessness. In fact, it's often in our imperfections that He is able to show His strength. Instead of looking for perfect people, He looks for those who are open, ready, and willing to trust Him, even with their shortcomings. Our weaknesses and struggles don't disqualify us. They make us more aware of our need for God's help, guidance, and grace. Embracing the fact that perfection is not required frees us from self-doubt and the pressure to live up to impossible standards. We can take risks, try new things, and pursue our calling without fear of failure. When we understand that God doesn't expect us to have all the answers or to always get things right, we can focus on being faithful rather than flawless. Faithfulness, showing up, persevering, and committing to growth is what God truly desires. It's our heart and willingness that matter, not a spotless record. Realizing that perfection is not a requirement allows us to live with authenticity and humility. We no longer need to pretend to have everything together, and we can embrace our humanity. It's in our honest, vulnerable moments that we connect most deeply with others and with God. Our imperfections are not obstacles, but opportunities for learning, resilience, and dependence on God. We don't need to wait until we feel good enough or ready enough. God can and will use us right where we are, imperfect yet fully loved and capable of impacting the world. God uses imperfect people to accomplish His plans, reminding us that He doesn't require perfection to bring about transformation, hope, and change. Throughout history, God has worked through people who had weaknesses, struggles, and even serious failures. He used people like Moses, who doubted his own ability to lead David, who made significant mistakes, yet was still called a man after God's own heart, and Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, but became a foundational leader in spreading the gospel. These examples show us that our limitations and imperfections don't disqualify us from being used for a greater purpose. God knows our imperfections, and He works through them to reveal His grace and power. In fact, our weaknesses often become the very channels through which He can shine. When we are aware of our shortcomings, we rely more fully on God, knowing that it's not by our strength, but by His that we can make an impact. Imperfect people, with all their flaws and insecurities, are often the most receptive to God's guidance, knowing they don't have all the answers. Their reliance on Him allows His power to be evident, reminding others that it's God's strength that makes the difference, not human capability. Our imperfections can also serve as encouragement to others. When people see that God can use someone who struggles or makes mistakes, they're reminded that they too are valuable and capable of fulfilling a purpose. God uses flawed people to connect with others through shared experiences, empathy, and understanding. Our imperfections become relatable, showing that we don't need to have it all together to be a part of God's work. Instead of striving to be perfect, we can focus on being genuine, compassionate, and willing to serve, knowing that God works through us as we are. God also uses our mistakes as opportunities for growth, humility, and transformation. When we make mistakes, we're given the chance to learn, to deepen our character, and to draw closer to Him. These experiences build resilience and shape us into people who are better equipped to serve and support others. God isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for teachability, humility, and a willingness to step forward despite our fears and doubts. Ultimately, God uses imperfect people to show that His love, grace, and purpose aren't limited by human weaknesses. Our imperfections become part of our story and our testimony, showing others that if God can work through us, He can work through anyone. He delights in taking what the world sees as broken or flawed and turning it into something beautiful and purposeful. It's a reminder that no matter where we are in life or what we've been through, we are never beyond being used by God. Our imperfections don't limit us. They allow God's presence, strength, and love to be known in powerful and lasting ways. Your weakness can showcase God's strength in ways that your strength never could. When you face challenges and moments of vulnerability, you are forced to acknowledge that you cannot do it all on your own. And it is in this realization that God's power becomes most evident. In times of weakness, you are more likely to surrender to God's will, seek His help, and allow Him to work through you. Your inability to manage everything on your own creates space for God to step in and do what you cannot, showing both you and others that His power is greater than any human effort. The Bible tells us that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. This means that when we acknowledge our limitations, God's power is magnified. It is not in our own ability to handle every situation with ease that God's greatness is seen, but in how we rely on Him when we are unable to carry the weight ourselves. In those moments when you feel most powerless, God's strength is fully displayed, proving that He is capable of doing far more than we could ever imagine, even through our frailties. Your weakness doesn't disqualify you from fulfilling God's purpose. It is actually the perfect backdrop for His power to be revealed. When you are stretched beyond your limits, you are more aware of God's sufficiency. It's in the times when you feel like you can't go on, when your strength runs out, that you experience His grace in a deeper way. These moments of weakness provide opportunities for God to step in and show that He is with you, carrying you through what you cannot endure on your own. His strength becomes your source, and you are able to do things that would otherwise be impossible. Additionally, your weakness can encourage others. When people see you overcoming struggles not by your own ability, but through God's strength, they are inspired and reminded that God can work through anyone. They see your vulnerability, but they also see your perseverance and your faith, which points to the greatness of the God you serve. Your testimony becomes a living example of how God works in and through our weaknesses to bring glory to His name. In moments of weakness, you are more reliant on God's direction, wisdom, and timing. You stop relying on your own understanding and start leaning on His. This dependence on God's strength, rather than your own, often leads to outcomes that are far better than what you could have achieved by yourself. When God shows His strength in your weakness, He doesn't just strengthen you for that moment. He shapes you, builds your character, and deepens your trust in Him for the future. Your weakness is not a setback, but a setup for God to demonstrate His power in ways that would not be possible otherwise. It is through your vulnerability that God is able to work in ways that leave no doubt that His strength, not yours, is what sustains you. Your limitations highlight His limitless power, and in that, His glory is revealed to you and to those around you. Perfection is God's job, not ours. We often place immense pressure on ourselves, thinking that we need to be perfect in every aspect of our lives, our work, our relationships, our appearance, and even our spiritual walk. We strive for flawlessness, believing that anything less means we're failing or not worthy of God's love and purpose. However, the truth is that perfection is something only God can accomplish, and He never expects us to attain it on our own. God, in His wisdom, understands that we are human, and part of being human means that we are inherently imperfect. Perfection is not something we can reach by sheer effort or discipline. It's a process, and one that He is actively working on in each of us. Our job is not to be perfect, but to trust that He is shaping us, molding us, and refining us into the people He created us to be. It's His role to perfect us over time, not ours to achieve some idealized version of ourselves. When we focus on perfection, we can become disillusioned, frustrated, and even paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. But when we recognize that perfection is God's job, it frees us to focus on the things we can control: our willingness, our openness to growth, and our desire to follow His guidance. We don't need to stress over every misstep or imperfection. Instead, we can rely on His grace to carry us through, knowing that He is working behind the scenes to bring about our transformation. God is the one who perfects our hearts, our minds, and our lives. He does this through the Holy Spirit, who works in us day by day, helping us grow in love, patience, kindness, and every other fruit that makes us more like Christ. It is not through our own power or strength that we become perfected, but through God's sanctifying work within us. He is the one who purifies our hearts and renews our minds, gradually transforming us into His image. This understanding relieves us of the burden of perfectionism. We can stop comparing ourselves to unrealistic standards and instead trust the process of becoming who God has called us to be. Perfection is the work of a loving God who knows exactly what we need to reach the potential He has for us. Our imperfections are opportunities for God's grace to shine through, and as He works in us, we become more aligned with His will for our lives. Ultimately, perfection is something that will only be fully realized in eternity. In this life, we are constantly being shaped and refined. We don't have to have everything together to be used by God. His perfection is a gift that we receive through faith, and it's His job to bring us to that place of complete wholeness. In the meantime, our role is simply to trust Him, allow Him to work in us, and respond to His calling as we move forward on the journey He has set before us. Grace covers imperfection in the most profound and freeing way. Grace is the unmerited favor of God, the undeserved love that reaches us despite our flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings. We often feel the weight of our imperfections, whether they are moral failures, brokenness, or moments of weakness, and we may believe that these things separate us from God's love or purpose. But grace is the answer to that lie. It is in our imperfection that God's grace is most evident, showing that we are not defined by our mistakes, but by His love and mercy. Grace does not excuse sin, but it covers it. It acknowledges our faults and failures, but invites us to step beyond them, to be restored and forgiven. Where we fall short, grace fills in the gaps. It is not a free pass to continue in error, but a powerful force that empowers us to move forward, grow, and change. Grace reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be loved, to be used, or to be accepted by God. It meets us where we are, right in the middle of our mess, and covers us with the mercy that flows from the heart of God. When we understand that grace covers imperfection, we are free to stop hiding our flaws and pretending to be something we're not. We can be vulnerable and authentic because we know that our imperfections do not disqualify us from God's love or purpose. God's grace is not dependent on our perfection, rather. It is a constant presence that reminds us that we are never too broken, too far gone, or too flawed to be restored. It is through grace that God works in us, refining us and molding us into who He wants us to be. The more we embrace grace, the more we allow God to use us despite our imperfections. This covering of grace also enables us to offer grace to others. When we realize how much grace we've received, it becomes easier to extend grace to those around us. It teaches us not to judge others based on their flaws, but to love them and walk alongside them, knowing that we are all in need of grace. Grace transforms our relationships by helping us see beyond imperfections and recognize the potential for growth, healing, and redemption. Grace is not just a covering for our sins, it is a means of empowerment. It is what allows us to get up after we've fallen, to keep going when we feel unworthy, and to trust that God's plans for us are not thwarted by our failures. Grace opens the door to a life that is not bound by perfection, but one that is fueled by God's love and mercy. It is the antidote to the shame and guilt that perfectionism often brings, allowing us to live fully and confidently, knowing that we are accepted and loved just as we are. In the end, it is grace that transforms imperfection into an opportunity for God to demonstrate His power and love in ways that perfection could never accomplish. Mistakes are an essential part of growth, not something to be feared or avoided. They are the stepping stones that lead us forward on the path of personal and spiritual development. When we make mistakes, we often feel disappointment, shame, or regret. But these emotions can be reframed as signs of progress, because it's in those moments of failure that the greatest lessons are learned. Growth doesn't happen in a straight line. It comes through trial, error, and correction. It's through the mistakes we make that we are shaped, refined, and ultimately become who we are meant to be. Each mistake is an opportunity for reflection and learning. When we get something wrong, it opens our eyes to areas where we need to improve, where we need more patience, or where we need to trust God more deeply. Without mistakes, we would have no real way of knowing where we need to grow or how we can change. They are a form of feedback showing us what works and what doesn't, helping us refine our approach and align more closely with the path God has for us. Mistakes also teach us humility. They remind us that we are not in control of everything and that we are human, prone to imperfection. In those moments when we fall short, we learn to lean more on God's grace, trusting that He will guide us through the mistakes and help us rise stronger. It's a humbling experience to recognize that we don't have to be perfect to be used by God. In fact, He often works through our mistakes to teach us important truths about ourselves and about Him. Furthermore, mistakes encourage resilience. They teach us how to keep going even when things don't go according to plan. Life is full of unexpected turns, and mistakes are part of that journey. When we face a setback, it is not the end, it is a chance to try again, to get back up, and to grow in persistence and perseverance. The more mistakes we make, the more we develop the ability to bounce back, knowing that failure doesn't define us, it refines us. Making mistakes also creates space for empathy and understanding. When we fail, we learn what it feels like to struggle, which makes us more compassionate toward others when they face their own challenges. We become less judgmental and more supportive, recognizing that everyone is on their own journey of growth, learning, and improvement. Our mistakes help us see others through the lens of grace rather than criticism, allowing us to offer encouragement instead of condemnation. Ultimately, mistakes are part of the process of becoming who we were meant to be. They help us grow in wisdom, patience, and humility. They teach us about our limits and about God's limitless grace. They provide us with the tools we need to move forward and be better equipped for the next step in our journey. Embracing mistakes as part of growth frees us from the fear of failure and empowers us to take risks, step out in faith, and keep pursuing the purpose God has placed in our hearts, knowing that each misstep is a chance to learn and grow. God sees your potential, not just your past. Too often we allow our history to define us, our mistakes, our failures, our regrets, and we can become trapped in the belief that our past is all we are. We carry the weight of our shortcomings and feel unworthy of a brighter future, convinced that our past mistakes disqualify us from achieving something greater. But God does not look at us the way the world does. He sees beyond our failures and sees the person we are becoming, not just the person we have been. When God looks at you, He sees the unique potential that He placed inside of you before you were even born. He sees the purpose He has for your life, the gifts and talents He designed specifically for you to use in His kingdom. While others may see your past, your struggles, or your mistakes, God sees your heart, your growth, and the future He is shaping in you. His vision for you is not limited to the things you've done wrong or the mistakes you've made, but rather it is focused on who you are becoming in Him and the impact you are destined to make. This understanding should change the way you view yourself. God's view of you is not based on your past, it is based on His eternal plans for your future. He has a vision for your life that is greater than any regret, failure, or setback. His mercy covers your mistakes, and His grace transforms your story. Where you see limitations, God sees opportunities for growth and transformation. He is constantly at work in you, shaping your character, refining your purpose, and preparing you for the next step in His plan. Our past may shape us, but it does not define us. God's love and calling on our lives are not dependent on our past achievements or failures, but on His purpose and His ability to bring about transformation. In His eyes, we are not defined by our past mistakes, but by the potential He sees within us to do great things for His glory. No matter what has happened in the past, God is constantly calling us forward, inviting us to leave behind what is behind and to press on toward the future He has prepared for us. God is not interested in condemning us for our past. Instead, He is invested in helping us reach our fullest potential. He sees our mistakes, but He chooses to see them as opportunities to teach, refine, and restore us. He sees the person we can become, and He empowers us to walk in that destiny. While others might be quick to judge or focus on our past, God looks past our history and sees the future He's calling us to embrace. And He's patient with us, knowing that growth is a process, and that the journey toward fulfilling our potential is one that requires His guidance every step of the way. This truth should give us hope and encouragement. When we struggle with feelings of inadequacy or guilt from our past, we can remember that God does not judge us based on those moments. Instead, He sees the potential that lies ahead, and He is working in us to bring that potential to fruition. We can let go of the chains of guilt and regret, knowing that God has already forgiven us and is guiding us toward a future filled with purpose, growth, and transformation. We are not bound by our past. We are called to move forward into the future God has for us. In conclusion, it is essential to remember that God sees us not for our past, but for the incredible potential He has placed within us. Our mistakes, flaws, and shortcomings do not define who we are in His eyes. While the world may focus on what we've done, God looks at the heart and sees the future He is shaping for us. His grace covers our imperfections, and His love calls us forward, empowering us to step into the fullness of who He has created us to be. As we embrace His vision for our lives, we are reminded that our past does not limit our potential. God is always at work, refining us and guiding us toward a purpose greater than we can imagine. With Him, we are always moving forward, ever growing, ever becoming, and always covered by His grace.